Fellowship and about this morning because I have a lot to talk about on this morning in terms of a update. As you can see, we're going to do a prophetic update number 2. And I'm also excited because I'm going to share the next few weeks. Still can't.
Two. Check mic check one. Check mic check 1 2 1 2 check 1 2. So quiet. My God, help us. Preamp. Check 1 2 check 1 2 check 1 2 1 2 1 2 check 1 2 1 1 2 check 1 2 1 2 check 1. Ooh, that'd be good.
Good morning once again. I think our technical problems have been straightened out. And so, again, welcome to Prophetic Breadcrumbs here at Freedom Fellowship. And like I was saying earlier, I'm pretty excited about discussing what we're going to look at on this morning. A lot of things have happened over the last several weeks. Plus, I came across some information I think it's important to what we've been discussing in the past connected to Bible prophecy. And also, what we're going to discuss on this morning is we're going to be studying over the next several weeks. I'm excited about a new study that the Lord has given me, and I'll tell you more about that at the end here. So, before we jump into this, let's pray. Father, we thank you and we praise you for this blessed morning that we have to come together to lift up the name of Yeshua, the name of Jesus, to study his word, to learn more about him, the times that we're in, and how we can prepare ourselves for those things. We thank you, Father, and we praise you for your presence here with us. Say what you desire to say and do what you desire to do, because we belong to you, and so does Prophetic Breadcrumbs. And so we thank you for it and we praise you for it. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. All right, so let's look at some of the things that we're going to discuss. I'm going to give an update on the war in Israel. A lot has happened since the last time we came together. I'm going to talk about the U.S. presidential election, kind of some things to be thinking about as we approach that day. We know that day is coming on November 5th. In all actuality, people are already voting. Then we're going to go more in depth into some of the goings-ons that are happening in the Middle East. And when we talk about that, what I'm really going to be focusing on is the deals that are being made. There are things that are happening now in terms of trade, in terms of economics, that I believe help to set up what's going to come in the final days. And then lastly, we're going to discuss, like I mentioned earlier, a study that we're going to embark upon. It will be about the Psalms and how it is connected to Bible prophecy. We know that there are a couple Psalms that speak prophetically, but we're going to get a big picture overview of all of the Psalms. And we're going to see how certain ones are truly connected to Bible prophecy. The biggest thing that I think you'll get out of this is that you'll see the Psalms in a new way, and it'll help to build upon what you already know about the Psalms. And so, again, really excited about that. So, an update on the war in Israel. As you may already know, the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, was killed by Israel. In fact, did anybody see the videotape about how that happened? It's kind of crazy. I don't advise that you go see it. But he's basically, when I think they shoot him in some kind of way where it was through a drone. And he's still defiant to the end. At first he was running, but then he's defiant to the end after he's been shot. It almost looks like he was kind of, for lack of a better term, blown up, because parts of his body were missing, even to while he was still fighting, if you will. And so he was killed. He's the one who led Hamas when they attacked Israel on October 7th last year from the Gaza Strip. The day that this occurred, it was the day called Shemini Atzeret. I'm probably mispronouncing that. That's the 8th day associated with the Feast of Tabernacles. If you remember, the Feast of Tabernacles is actually 7 days long, but then God gives them instructions about what to do on the 8th day. And in Israel, that has actually become a 2-day celebration. The first day is Shemini Atzeret. The second day is what is called Simchat Torah, where they celebrate the giving of the Torah and the reading of the Torah. And so it was during this time that they attacked Israel. It's interesting, though, that Sinwar was killed on October 16th, which was the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles here in 2024. So it's like it came full circle. You attacked Israel during the Feast of Tabernacles. You die during the Feast of Tabernacles. Sinwar supposedly left instructions that if he were killed, to continue to fight, hoping to kick off, in his perspective, a regional war. Now, I believe as we get further into this discussion, you might see why he wants to do that, why he wanted to do that. But so that's what's happened during the war, or the war in Israel, as far as their defeat of Hamas. They're basically finishing off Hamas. They're continuing to war against Hezbollah, taking out many of their leaders. One of the things, if you've been paying attention, is that Israel is basically flexing their muscles. They have become very skilled in knowing where their leaders are and how to take them out. For the most part, their leaders have gone underground because they know if they come to the surface, Israel will take them out. And even when they don't, Israel is still taking them out. And so the goal is to defeat Hezbollah completely so that they can move their people back to northern Israel. Hezbollah, of course, is in Lebanon, which is to the north of Israel. And they have been sending rockets and bombs and things of that nature into the northern part of Israel. So those who dwell in the northern part of Israel had to escape, leave that part. And so it's Prime Minister Netanyahu's goal to resettle them back into northern Israel. And he knows the only way to do that is to completely defeat Hezbollah. They are suffering losses in their ranks. Just recently, they suffered the loss of 5 soldiers, 5 important individuals who are part of the Israeli Defense Force, or the IDF. In the incursion, the IDF discovered plans and enough weaponry to carry out a similar attack to October 7th. That's why it was so important for Israel to step up the war, if you will, against Hezbollah. Unfortunately, they had some opposition, primarily from this current administration, in doing so. But if they had listened to this current administration, it's quite possible that Hezbollah would have carried out an attack similar to the one that Hamas carried out on October 7th of last year. That was their plans. They wanted to hit Israel the same way that Hamas did. Hezbollah attempted to take out Prime Minister Netanyahu's home with a drone of their own, but they were unsuccessful, which then Prime Minister Netanyahu's reaction was, that was a bad move. In other words, he's sending the warning, okay, you think I've come after you before, now I'm really coming to get you. So, but they were unsuccessful. Some other things associated with the war in Israel. It was also discovered that one of the leaders of Hamas that was killed was part of the UN Relief Workers Agency, or UNRWA. You may hear it mentioned in the news, this organization called UNRWA. They're supposed to be a neutral organization that is funded by the United Nations. And in it being funded by the United Nations, many of the dollars that they have actually come from U.S. taxpayers. As you probably already know, the United States is a big part of the funding that the United Nations receives. So in all actuality, UNRWA is helping to fund terrorism. It's not because there are more than one Hamas leaders that are a part of UNRWA. And so that's something to keep an eye on. It actually should be a much bigger story here in America. But I think that there are other reasons why that is not the case. Partly, I believe, because our current administration still wants to try to limit Israel's war against Hamas and Hezbollah and even Iran. As I have here, Israel has also carried out strikes against Iran. Actually, it was just one day on October 25th, in retaliation for the missile attack that Iran committed against Israel some 3 weeks ago. And so, of course, Israel wants to hit back hard. But our current administration is kind of trying to restrain them in what they do and how they retaliate. Also, you may have heard about this. There was a leak of Israel's plans for an attack on Iran from the Department of Defense. Now, they are asking this question, was it intentional or was it accidental? One of the things that I have heard is that they know who the person is, and this person is known for their opposition to how Israel is fighting the war. They side with the current administration. So that leads many to believe that this leak was intentional. Now, of course, Israel's reaction to this is going to be, well, if there are these kinds of leaks going on, how apt are they to trust the United States right now with anything that they're about to do? Like I have here, it is well known that the president, the vice president, and many in their cabinet don't see eye to eye with Prime Minister Netanyahu on how to execute the war. They don't want Israel to attack Iran's nuclear facilities or their oil facilities. And those, of course, would be on the top of the list, because if you attack their nuclear capability, you weaken them as a nation in that part of the world. They're still striving for nuclear weapons. As far as we know, they don't have the capacity to deliver one just yet, but they're close. Also, if you attack their oil facilities, that's one of Iran's biggest sources of money, a big part of their economy. So if you attack their oil facility, it will cripple their economy. There's a lot more to this because, no, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to stay right here. I'm going to stay right here. One of the reasons why the current administration wants to limit Israel in their attack against Iran and against Hezbollah and Hamas is because they're concerned that Israel attacking those nations will or could possibly affect Vice President Harris's chances for being elected president. Because a big part of her constituency are people who support the Palestinians in that part of the world. And they're already having problems. If you've watched some of the rallies that Vice President Harris has had, some people have been marching outside and have even gotten in, and they start to demonstrate right there in the middle of her rally. And so they're very concerned that that aspect or that part of their constituency could choose. I doubt if they would vote for former President Trump, but they may just stay away from the elections, period. And so they don't want to offend that part of their constituency. So they're doing, basically what the current administration is doing is trying to play both sides. Yes, we strongly support Israel and their right to exist, but we also want to limit their ability to retaliate like they want to. One of the things to be aware of, too, the opposition to Israel and the Department of Defense is not a new thing when it comes to our government. To be honest, this is the first time I've heard this come from the Department of the Defense, but it does not surprise me because, of course, when you become president, you get to appoint generals in places of power. So quite naturally, you're going to appoint those that support your positions. Also, if you studied history, the Department of State or the State Department is known for their opposition to Israel in terms of they don't oppose Israel's right to exist, but what they really want ultimately is a two-state solution, which of course will limit Israel greatly and make them very vulnerable to their enemies. So this is a big part of the battle that Israel is dealing with. They're fighting an actual war there in Israel. They're fighting public opinion. And they're actually having to deal with those in their greatest ally, America, who oppose a lot of what they do. So that's the update on the war in Israel. Now let's look at the presidential election. We won't spend a whole lot of time on this. But of course, the election is upon us. In all actuality, early voting is already occurring. It's occurring here in the state of Texas. It's very tight. Basically, it's 50-50 right now in terms of polling across the nation. So everyone predicts that this will be very tight. But here is something to be aware of. It being 50-50 right now, actually, according to most prognosticators, this works in former President Trump's favor. Because this time in 2016, he was down by about 8 points to Hillary Clinton, and we know he won in 2016. In 2020, he was down by about the same margin, maybe a little bit larger, and we know that he barely lost to President Biden. So if it's 50-50, like they're saying, that points to the fact that then I have seen some, and I don't know how true this is, but I have seen some people predict that he may win by a landslide in the Electoral College, just based on the current numbers, the current polling. Of course, time will tell. Something tells me that even after November 5th, we still may not know who won. The reason this is so important prophetically is because Israel is watching the results of this very closely. Because if you know Israel and the people in Israel, they favor Trump over Harris. Most in Israel believe that Vice President Harris will just be a repeat of President Biden. Of course, based on this, their strategy and how they fight the war will change. If Vice President Harris wins, then they know they're going to get more of the same. But if former President Trump wins, then they know that that'll be the green light for them to be even more aggressive in their fighting. As I mentioned earlier, the Biden-Harris campaign is not nearly as in sync with Israel as Trump is. And like I said, they believe Israel being overly aggressive in their viewpoint will work against her election chances. So the whole world will be watching. Something to be aware of, too. Israel is not the only one that's going to be watching this. China, Russia, North Korea, many of the Middle East nations, they will be watching this, too. I know you've probably heard this before in the recent past, but I happen to believe it is very true now, more so than ever before. This is probably the most critical election in our history, especially, I would say, in this century, because so much is on the line. The outcome of this election is going to determine if the U.S. teeters left or right, and the outcome of this election is going to determine what other nations do. They know if Vice President Harris wins, then that gives them more liberty to do what they want to do. But they know if former President Trump wins, then I've heard Trump described as like a wild card. Many of the world's leaders don't know what he will do, and that makes them fearful, which, in my humble opinion, may be what's needed right now. And so I have here, make sure you vote and pray, pray, pray. Pray especially for our nation based on the outcome of the election, because it may become violent. And I hate even bringing that up, but it's just the truth. It may become violent. Now, here is where I want to spend most of my time. An update on the Middle East. Some things that I want to bring up. The first thing. Now, what I'm going to discuss here is something that I've already talked about, but it's a key piece of what I'm going to discuss after this. As many of you know, in September of 2022, Israel's Temple Institute imported 5 red heifers. They all came from Texas with the hope of reinstituting temple sacrifices someday. Of course, the hope of reinstituting temple sacrifices are mainly driven by religious Jews. Most of Israel is secular. They have no desire to do that. But there is a sect of religious Jews who do have that desire. In September of 2023, the Temple Institute announced the birth of a red heifer and is currently being grown and groomed as a potential sacrifice. Because, of course, if you understand the red heifer, it has to be red. It can't have other color hairs or anything. It has to be without blemish, without spot, perfect, if you will. As I mentioned before, this whole thing surrounding the red heifers was a part of the motivation of Hamas for their attack on October 7th. They referred to their attack as the Al-Aqsa flood. Al-Aqsa is a reference to the mosque near the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and their desire to protect it. They know that the Jews' desire to resume sacrifices is also connected to their desire to see the temple rebuilt. And they see any progress toward that happening as a threat to the mosque that now exists. So that was part of the reasoning why they attacked on October 7th. There are other reasons too that we're going to discuss, but this was a big one. In fact, their leaders released statements saying that this was part of the reason for why they attacked on October 7th. What also may have been motivation for those attacks? Well, and here is where, and I need to do a better job of this myself, paying attention to what is occurring in that part of the world. You may have heard of what is called the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, or IMEC. Basically, this is a trade route agreement that was the result of a G20 summit. We know the G20 summit is where the most powerful economic nations get together to discuss economic matters and to discuss trade and that type of thing, which the USA approved, that starts in India, goes through the Middle East to include Saudi Arabia, goes to Jordan, and then to Haifa, which is a port in Israel, and then to Greece/Europe. It's a trade route. One of the things, and we don't pay attention to this, we only paid attention to this when COVID occurred, when things could not be shipped as normal because of things being shut down. But trade in our world is huge economically. And this IMEC agreement basically is a trade route that begins in India, goes through the Middle East, hits Israel, and then makes its way up to Greece, which will then touch the rest of Europe. In other words, we don't need to understand all the aspects of this. There's a lot of money involved. And of course, in our world, the more money you make, the more powerful you are as a nation. This IMEC corridor agreement is in direct competition for China's Belt and Road Initiative. This is their initiative to control the trade ports of most of the world. Again, this is something that, as Americans, most of us are not aware of. China, they have what is called the Belt and Road Initiative, and what they do is they go to different countries, and they offer to build up their ports, lend them money to do so, provide security and safe transport for all the goods that they want to import and export. If those nations cannot pay them back, and many times they can't, China seizes control of it. Basically, they own it. Something that's going to become huge in the days that lie ahead are these types of agreements. They've always been huge. You're just going to hear more and more about it. So the IMEC agreement is in direct conflict with what China wants to do. Now, this is going to make sense here in a few minutes, so stick with me. Iran and Turkey are also not pleased with the idea of IMEC either. They do not like it because there are things that they want to do. They want to be a big player in these things. While this was announced, it was believed that Saudi Arabia was about to join the Abraham Accords and recognize Israel as a partner in peace. Now, keep this in mind. IMEC, that co-trade route agreement, at the heart of it is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a big part of this. They were about to become a part of the Abraham Accords. So basically, them becoming a part of the Abraham Accords was happening at about the same time that this agreement was struck. Saudi Arabia includes the two most holy places in Islam, Mecca and Medina. And it doesn't matter. There are two factions basically in Islam, Shia Muslims and Sunni Muslims. But no matter what side of the fence you're on, the two most holy places are controlled by Saudi Arabia. Now imagine if you're Iran, which primarily I believe has Shia Muslims. They're an enemy of Israel. They also don't like Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is about to join an agreement with Israel, which of course will X them out, basically. Not only does Saudi Arabia become more powerful, Israel becomes more influential and powerful as well. Iran wants no part of that. So when Hamas attacked Israel, the issue of the Palestinians arose again, and it is used against Israel all the time. It's being used today. Saudi Arabia can't be seen as publicly siding with Israel in this war, so the war has put on hold all of this, them joining the Abraham Accords and becoming a part of this IMEC agreement. So it's quite possible that that was part of the strategy, which of course brings into play the fact that Iran was behind this all the time. China may not have been a part of it, but they probably did not have a problem with it. Russia is the same. Russia is a big part of this whole cabal as well. A huge investment is being made by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, in the building of towers and cities that will house millions of people. I've talked about this before. A place called Neom is being built up big time, N-E-O-M. If you Google that, you'll see all that is going on there. In all actuality, Saudi Arabia wants to make Neom the center of all of this. These trade routes, technologically speaking, that area, that place is the centerpiece, if you will, for Saudi Arabia. They will be the largest and most technologically advanced buildings and cities in all the world. They are building buildings that will house millions of people that will also be able to move along these rails from one place to the other. Inside of these buildings, there will be no need for you owning your own vehicles because you'll be able to get from anywhere in that city, in this building, within 10 to 12 minutes. This should probably bring Genesis 10 to mind, the building of towers. That's where they're going. You probably haven't heard about this. Google is building a fiber optic cable system that's called Blue Raman, or Raman. It's probably the better pronunciation, Blue Raman. It will connect Europe, Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and India, giving Israel connection to the Arab nations for the first time in their history. The U.S. is very interested in this going forward as well. Of course, Google is an American company. Egypt Turkey, Iran are not very happy about this. They do not want to see this happen. So keep in mind, you have that trade agreement, IMAC. You have the Abraham Accords. And now we have what Google is doing here. Who's at the center of all of this? Saudi Arabia. Due to all the information, commerce, and international travel that may run through it. This makes Saudi Arabia a candidate to be Babylon the Great of Revelation chapters 17 and 18. Now, I want you to listen to a description. I'm going to read Revelation 17 and 18. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her head was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. So, this harlot, filth, spiritual harlotry, but will control the wealth of the world, basically. Kings, it says here, kings have committed fornication with her. Goes on to say, but the angel said to me, "Why did you marvel? I will tell you of the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is." Now, I'm not going to read all of that. The beast in this case, we know, is the Antichrist and the system or allegiance of kings that partner with him. So we see this connection between the beast, the Antichrist and his system, and the harlot. So now, I'm going to stop right here because there's another part I want to cover. There is happening, you don't hear about it much, but the rise of what is called the Turkic state. Of course, Turkic connected to Turkey. If you know much about Turkey, their leader, Erdogan, I think is his last name, his desire is to rebuild the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire existed until the early part of the 20th century, when they were defeated by Great Britain. Up until that point, they controlled Jerusalem and Israel. His desire is to rebuild that. The leader of Turkey and Azerbaijan are seeking to create what is called the Zanjur Corridor with other Turkic-speaking states. All the stands that you hear about, Turkmenistan and those nations, that's part of that whole deal. Like I said earlier, it's his desire to recreate the Ottoman Empire. Right now, Iran opposes this corridor because it compromises its borders with Armenia. Armenia exists in between Turkey and Azerbaijan. Outside of Armenia, Turkey and all of those stands, if you will, are made up of Muslims, mostly Shia Muslims, which allows you to see why Turkey and Iran work closely together. It is believed by many, including me, that the Antichrist may arise from Turkey. Again, I want you to keep in mind, up until now, we talked about Babylon, what could potentially be Babylon the Great, made up primarily of Sunni Muslims. On the other side of this, starting with Turkey, we have the beast, if you will, potentially. Again, I don't want to be dogmatic about this. I'm not saying I'm 100% correct on this, but it is quite possible that the beast will arise from Turkey or that part of the world. So keep this in mind. Combining the IMEC with Saudi Arabia at the center with the rise of a Turkic state possibly sets the stage for the relationship between harlot Babylon and the beast. Watching what goes on in the Middle East is something for us as believers to keep our eyes on. Here is the reason why I'm bringing this out. If you go back to Revelation 17. I'm going to skip down to verse 12. It says, "The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet." And this is referencing the beast. "But they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth." So before this occurs, the beast actually is in partnership with Babylon the Great. The beast carries Babylon the Great. At some point, God is going to stir up a division that causes the beast to attack Babylon, destroying her. And if we go to Revelation 18, verse 9, it says, "The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, and cinnamon and incense, fragrant oil and frankincense, wine and oil, fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and bodies and souls of men. They will mourn when Babylon the Great is destroyed, because their means of making money, their means of power will be destroyed and come to an end. So what basically I'm doing is laying out a possible scenario. Again, I'm not being dogmatic about this. I happen to believe that the Antichrist is going to arise from Islam. There are those who believe it's going to arise from Europe. I'm just putting forth a possible scenario based on what is happening in our world today. things are aligning that point to what could possibly be the beast nations led by Turkey and Babylon the Great and the kings that partner with her, led possibly by Saudi Arabia. That's why it's important for us to keep our eyes on what is going on in that part of the world, because it's going to affect America and the rest of the nations. And so that's my update. So now what I want to do is talk about the upcoming study that we're going to embark upon, the Psalms and Bible prophecy. We will look at the Psalms as a whole. Of course, there are 150 Psalms. Don't fret, we're not going to try to cover each and every one of them. We're not going to do that. We're going to look at who wrote them, because David is responsible for a good number of them. Asaph is responsible for some. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there are Psalms that they're called the Songs of Moses. There's a group of them, I believe, starting with Psalm 90. We're going to look at the source of these Psalms. We're also going to look at how the Psalms are organized. A lot of times, I know growing up and being in church and, in my later years, a lot of times I would go to the Psalms if I needed encouragement or something like that. I would pick out one of my favorite Psalms. You might do the same. But what most of us don't understand is that there is a organization of the Psalms. They are organized in the order that they are for a reason, because they paint a picture. If you have a study Bible, you might notice when you go to the book of Psalms, before you get to Psalm 1, it talks about book 1. Then it gets to a certain point and it talks about book 2, book 3, and so on and so forth to book 5. That is purposeful, because the way that they're organized paints a picture that we're going to look at. We're going to discuss how the Psalms, at least the ones written by David, emerged from the covenant that God made with David and why that's important. We're also going to focus on specific Psalms that are connected to the first and second coming of Christ. Basically, what I want to do is help you to see how important the Psalms are to Bible prophecy and to the plans of God. We often go to the prophetic books, Daniel, Isaiah, Zechariah, so on and so forth. We go to the book of Revelation. The Psalms is very prophetic as well, and we're going to see that. So I'm very excited about that study. So that's basically it for this morning. Looking forward to starting this new study. Those of you who are online, I hope you have a blessed week, and hopefully you will join us next week for part 1 of that study on the Psalms and Bible prophecy. Until then, God bless.